The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the driveway as Eleanor, weary from a long day, fumbled for her car keys. At 78, her steps were slower, but her mind remained sharp, too sharp to ignore the unease that had been lingering in her chest for weeks. She was about to slide into the driver's seat when she felt a sudden tug at her sleeve. It was Leo, her 10-year-old grandson. His wide eyes, usually full of mischief and laughter, were now clouded with fear. Before Eleanor could ask what was wrong, the boy reached up with trembling hands, pressed his palm firmly over her mouth, and whispered in a voice so low she barely heard it over the rustling trees. "Don't say a word, Grandma. They're listening to us." Eleanor froze. Her heart skipped a beat. She looked into Leo's eyes, and what she saw there chilled her more than the cool evening breeze. This was not a child's game. His lips quivered as if he were carrying a secret far too heavy for someone his age. Slowly, Leo removed his hand but kept his finger pressed against his lips. He glanced nervously toward the house, where the curtains in Clara's office twitched as though someone might be watching. Then, leaning close to his grandmother's ear, he whispered again, his words quick and broken. "I heard Mom and Ms. Jenkins. They were talking about you. They said you'll have to sign some papers. And then, you'll disappear from this house." The words struck Eleanor like a slap. For a moment, she felt dizzy, gripping the car door for balance. Disappear? Sign papers? Her mind reeled. She had always suspected Clara's ambition was stronger than her loyalty, but to hear it confirmed through the frightened voice of her grandson was almost unbearable. She looked at Leo, her hands trembling as she brushed a stray curl from his forehead. "Leo, sweetheart, are you sure?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Leo nodded quickly, his eyes darting back to the house. "They don't know I heard. Please, Grandma. Don't let them know I told you." His small fingers clutched her sleeve tightly, as though she were his only safe harbor in a storm too big for either of them. Eleanor's chest tightened with both fear and resolve. She could no longer dismiss the unease she had felt. Something was happening, something dark, something dangerous. And now, not only her own safety but also the innocence of her grandson was tangled in it. She bent down, kissed Leo's forehead gently, and forced a reassuring smile onto her face. "Don't worry, my dear. I'll take care of this," she whispered, though her heart pounded with doubt. As Leo scurried back toward the house, Eleanor stood frozen by her car, her mind racing. The world she thought she controlled, her home, her family, her legacy, suddenly felt like shifting ground beneath her feet. The warning had come not from a lawyer or a trusted friend, but from the trembling lips of a child. And that made it all the more terrifying. That night, Eleanor sat alone in her study, the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel echoing louder than usual, as though it were marking the countdown of her own fate. Leo's warning gnawed at her thoughts, pulling up memories she had tried to brush aside only days earlier. She remembered vividly the last meeting in the parlor, Clara seated with her legs crossed, poised and sharp, her assistant Ms. Jenkins at her side like a shadow, and Mr. Harrison, the family lawyer, adjusting his glasses nervously as he placed the stack of documents before her. "Mother," Clara had said sweetly, her tone sugar-coated yet edged with steel. "This is only a precaution. You're getting older, and we need to make sure everything runs smoothly should anything happen to you." Eleanor had bristled at the words. She was 78, yes, but her mind was clear, and she was far from helpless. Still, she picked up the papers, scanning them carefully. That's when she noticed it, a clause buried deep in the legal jargon, phrased so ambiguously it made her uneasy. When she pressed for clarification, Mr. Harrison had shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "It's standard procedure," he had muttered, avoiding her eyes. Just a matter of efficiency. But Eleanor was not a woman to be brushed aside. She pressed harder, her sharp gaze pinning the lawyer down. And yet, instead of answers, she was met with silence. Clara had smiled, her hand resting possessively on Eleanor's shoulder. "Don't trouble yourself with the details, Mother. You've always trusted me, haven't you?" The memory made Eleanor's stomach turn. Trust. That word had become a weapon in Clara's mouth. She recalled how Andrew, her only son, had once balanced Clara's ambition with his own level-headedness. But now Andrew was miles away, working remotely, his presence in family matters reduced to short phone calls and polite assurances. He had unknowingly left the reins of the household in Clara's hands, and by extension, Ms. Jenkins's calculating grip. Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she thought of Ms. Jenkins. Once just her assistant, she had slowly, almost invisibly, embedded herself into the fabric of the household. She managed the staff, the finances, even the errands that Eleanor used to enjoy doing herself. And now, sitting beside Clara, she looked less like an employee and more like a co-conspirator. A sudden chill ran down Eleanor's spine. The pieces began to fall into place. The pressure to sign the papers. Mr. Harrison's evasiveness. Andrew's absence. And Leo's whispered warning. They weren't just waiting for her to falter with age. They were preparing to take everything, her estate, her independence, perhaps even her life. Eleanor closed her eyes, steadying her breath. For years, she had been the matriarch, the unshakable foundation of the family. But tonight, as shadows danced across her study walls, she felt like prey, and the hunters were already circling. Still, a flicker of defiance lit in her chest. If Clara thought she could strip her of dignity and legacy, she was sorely mistaken. Eleanor had built this life with resilience, and she would not surrender it without a fight. In the silence of her study, Eleanor made a vow to herself: she would uncover the full extent of this conspiracy. And when she did, she would make Clara, Jenkins, and even the slippery Mr. Harrison regret underestimating her. The next morning, Eleanor awoke with a heaviness in her chest, the kind that no night's sleep could cure. Her tea from the night before still lingered bitterly on her tongue, as though her body remembered something her mind had overlooked. Leo, wide-eyed and restless, waited by the door of her room. "Grandma," he whispered urgently, glancing down the hall as though shadows themselves might betray him, "I saw Mama last night. She was yelling at Ms. Jenkins." Eleanor's heart tightened. "What did you see, Leo?" Leo fidgeted, his small hands trembling. "Mama told Ms. Jenkins that if she didn't do what she was told, Sophia would get hurt." "Ms. Jenkins was crying, Grandma. She said she didn't want to anymore, but Mama," his voice cracked, his innocence struggling against the horror of what he had overheard. Eleanor pulled him close, her arms trembling. Clara had crossed lines Eleanor never thought her daughter capable of. Threatening a child? Using fear to bind loyalty? That same day, Eleanor decided to observe carefully. She sat at the dining table, her meals now objects of suspicion. Clara insisted on preparing her tea, her tone overly sweet. Eleanor pretended to sip it but discreetly let the liquid cool untouched. Hours later, her body still felt steady, clearer than it had in weeks. A chilling realization struck her: the sudden drowsiness, the dizziness, the fog in her thoughts of late, they had not been age. They had been induced. Clara had been drugging her. The betrayal twisted like a knife. Later that evening, while Eleanor tried to steady her resolve in her study, a soft thud at the door drew her attention. A plain envelope slid under the frame. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a single slip of paper, its message typed, cold and cruel. Sign the papers, or Sophia pays the price. Her breath caught. Sophia, Ms. Jenkins's daughter. The sweet, fragile girl Eleanor had met once or twice when Jenkins brought her by the house. The letter confirmed everything Leo had said. Clara wasn't only manipulating her grandson's fear, but also holding Ms. Jenkins hostage with maternal love. Eleanor pressed the paper against her chest, her pulse pounding. This was no longer just about her fortune or her independence, this was about lives. Clara had created a web of control, one that ensnared everyone around her. Eleanor's mind raced. If she resisted, Clara might lash out. If she obeyed, she would lose everything she had built, and still, there was no guarantee Sophia would be safe. The study grew darker as the sun sank, shadows pooling in the corners like silent witnesses. Eleanor looked at Leo, who sat curled on the armchair, watching her with frightened eyes. She thought of Ms. Jenkins, trapped between fear for her daughter and the weight of guilt in betraying her employer. The stakes were higher now than Eleanor had ever imagined. Clara was not just planning an inheritance grab, she was orchestrating terror. Eleanor clenched her fist, her old bones aching but her spirit unbroken. She knew now that Clara would stop at nothing. But if Clara thought threats and poison would silence her, she had underestimated the strength that came with survival, with motherhood, with age. For Eleanor, the game had changed. And this time, she was determined to fight back, not only for herself, but for Leo, for Sophia, and for the truth. Eleanor's hands trembled as she clutched the envelope with the threatening note, its words still burning in her mind. She knew she could not face Clara head-on without proof. Clara thrived on manipulation and fear, only the truth could strip her schemes bare. Her thoughts turned to Sophia. If Clara was using the child as a pawn, Eleanor needed to know the full story. And there was only one place to find answers, the hospital. That evening, under the guise of a routine medical checkup, Eleanor asked Leo's babysitter to watch him and quietly called Alice, an old friend who had once been a nurse at the city hospital. Alice had been Eleanor's confidant for decades, a woman whose loyalty could be trusted in a world where trust was growing scarce. When Eleanor arrived at the hospital, the sterile smell of disinfectant pricked her senses, stirring unease. Every sound, the squeak of rubber saws, the beeping of machines, the hushed voices of doctors, felt magnified, as though the walls themselves knew secrets. Alice greeted her with a concerned frown. "You sounded urgent on the phone." "What is it, Ellie?" Eleanor leaned in, lowering her voice. "It's about Sophia. Jenkins's daughter. I need you to check her records." Quietly. "No one can know." Alice hesitated. "That could get me into trouble." "Please," Eleanor whispered, her eyes heavy with desperation. "It's life or death. For Sophia. For Leo. For me." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as Alice slipped away to access the files. Eleanor sat in the cold waiting area, her heart pounding with each tick of the clock. She could almost hear Clara's voice in her head, smooth and venomous, "Sign the papers, or Sophia pays the price." At last, Alice returned, her face pale, her hands gripping a folder. "Ellie, these records have been tampered with." Eleanor froze. "What do you mean?" Alice opened the file, revealing notes written in different hands, mismatched dates, and diagnoses that contradicted each other. According to these entries, Sophia has a severe congenital heart defect requiring urgent surgery. But I checked the original admission logs and test results. The truth is, Alice drew a deep breath. Sophia had nothing more than a mild seasonal cold. There is no heart condition. None. The words struck Eleanor like lightning. The world around her seemed to tilt. All those moments when Jenkins had broken down, weeping over her daughter's fragile health, the desperate way she had clung to Clara's promises of help, it had all been a lie. A cruel fabrication, engineered by Clara to enslave Ms. Jenkins with fear. Eleanor's chest burned with rage. My own daughter, deceiving another mother by exploiting her love for her child? It was unthinkable, yet undeniable. Clara's cruelty had no boundaries. Alice touched her arm gently. Ellie, I don't know what's going on, but whoever did this, they're dangerous. You must be careful. Eleanor nodded, though her mind was already racing. Jenkins wasn't a traitor by choice, she was a victim, just like Leo, just like Sophia. Clara's shadow loomed over them all. As Eleanor walked out of the hospital into the cold night air, the city lights blurred through the tears stinging her eyes. For the first time, she realized just how deep Clara's manipulations ran. This wasn't just about money or power, it was about domination, about breaking people until they bent to her will. Eleanor tightened her coat around her frail frame. She was tired, yes, but she was not broken. Clara had built her empire of lies on fear. And Eleanor had just found the crack in its foundation. The polished mahogany table stretched the length of the room, its surface gleaming under the cold fluorescent lights. The atmosphere was thick, suffocating, as Eleanor sat at one end, the stack of legal documents before her like a trap she could almost feel snapping shut. Clara stood nearby, exuding a calm, calculated confidence. She was impeccably dressed, her smile faint but sharp, her eyes trained on Eleanor like a predator watching its prey. Mr. Harrison, the family lawyer, adjusted his glasses nervously, avoiding Eleanor's gaze. Beside him, two silent witnesses, colleagues handpicked by Clara, sat as though to legitimize the process. Eleanor's hands trembled as she reached for the pen. Every instinct screamed at her to resist, but Clara leaned in and whispered, low and venomous. Sign it, Mother. The sooner you do, the sooner we can stop all this unpleasantness. Eleanor glanced around the table. No allies. No one to save her. Just the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She thought of Leo's frightened whisper, "They are listening to us," and almost froze. Her fingers brushed the pen. Then, just as the tip touched the paper, the heavy boardroom doors burst open. Stop. Everyone turned. Ms. Jenkins stepped inside, her face pale but resolute, clutching a small USB drive in her hand like a weapon. Her eyes darted from Eleanor to Clara, then hardened. This signing cannot continue. Clara's face darkened. What are you doing here? I'm doing what's right, Jenkins said, her voice trembling but loud enough to echo in the room. She handed the USB to the officer who followed close behind her, a uniformed policeman whose presence immediately shifted the balance of power. The officer plugged the USB into the conference laptop. Static filled the speakers before a clear, chilling voice emerged, Clara's. Make her sign it. Drug her if you have to. No one will ever know. Once the papers are signed, she won't have a say in anything anymore. The room fell silent. The words echoed, damning and undeniable. Eleanor's eyes widened, her frail body stiffening as vindication and horror washed over her all at once. Clara lunged forward, slamming her palm on the table. This is a lie. A fabrication. But the recording continued, her voice unmistakable. If Jenkins doesn't cooperate, her precious Sophia will never get the surgery she needs. Fear is the best leash. Jason, Eleanor's other son, who had been standing quietly in the corner, torn between his loyalty to his wife Clara and the nagging doubts about his mother, staggered back. His face drained of color as the truth sank in. Clara, his voice cracked, all this time, you lied? You used my own mother, my son, Jenkins, everyone. Clara's composure shattered. She screamed at Jenkins, at Jason, at anyone who would listen. You don't understand. I did this for us. For our future. The police officer stepped forward. Clara, you are under arrest for fraud, blackmail, and attempted coercion. He reached for her wrists, snapping the cold handcuffs into place. Clara fought, thrashing against the officer's grip. You'll regret this. Every one of you. Her voice, once smooth and commanding, broke into frantic shrieks as she was dragged from the boardroom. Silence fell. The weight of truth lingered heavily in the room. Jason turned to his mother, his eyes filled with shame and regret. Mom. He faltered, then finally stepped closer, his voice trembling. I should have trusted you. I doubted you when you needed me most. And now. I see everything. Eleanor, exhausted yet unbroken, reached for his hand. For the first time in years, Jason held it tightly, as if afraid to let go. Leo rushed to her side, throwing his small arms around her waist. I knew you were right, Grandma. I knew it. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. She had been silenced, threatened, deceived, but not defeated. Clara's power had crumbled, and with it, the chains that bound their family. For the first time in a long while, Eleanor felt hope. The boardroom still vibrated with the echo of Clara's furious screams as the officers dragged her down the corridor. The door shut with a heavy clang, leaving an uneasy silence. Everyone remained frozen, as if afraid to move after witnessing the mask ripped off so violently. Then, Ms. Jenkins broke. Her shoulders slumped, and tears streamed down her face as she covered her mouth, choking back sobs. I helped her, she whispered, her voice hoarse. I helped Clara because I thought I had no choice. Eleanor's gaze softened, though her chest ached. Why, Jenkins? Why would you stand with her against me? Jenkins trembled, her fingers clutching the edge of the table. Because Sophia needed surgery. Clara told me she knew people who could pull strings at the hospital, make sure my little girl got the treatment she needed. She said if I didn't help her, if I didn't push you, Sophia would die. The room gasped. Jason looked away, guilt etched on his face. Eleanor inhaled sharply, the words slicing through her heart. Before anyone could respond, Mr. Harrison, the family lawyer, shifted uneasily in his chair. His eyes darted toward the door Clara had been dragged through, then back at Jenkins. He rubbed his temples, visibly tormented, before speaking. There's something you don't know, he muttered. His voice cracked under the weight of his words. Something Clara made me hide. Everyone turned to him. What are you talking about? Eleanor asked, her tone sharp but laced with dread. Harrison's hands trembled as he adjusted his glasses. Sophia is not your daughter, Ms. Jenkins. The words fell like thunder. Jenkins staggered back, her knees buckling as if the ground had been ripped away from her. What are you saying? Clara lied to you, Harrison continued, his face ashen. Your real daughter passed away years ago. She had a fever that turned critical. Clara was there that night. She offered you comfort, took charge when you were too broken to question anything. But she used your grief to manipulate you. She replaced your child's body with Sophia. No, Jenkins shook her head violently, pressing her palms against her ears. No. That's impossible. I held Sophia in my arms. I raised her. She's mine. Harrison swallowed hard, his voice barely steady. Sophia is Clara's child. The result of an affair she had years ago. She never wanted the world to know. So she used you, Jenkins. She let you believe Sophia was yours so she could keep her secret buried, and control you at the same time. The room erupted with disbelief. Jason slammed his hand against the table, his face red with fury. She lied to all of us, even about her own child? Jenkins collapsed into a chair, her sobs ripping through the air. She clutched her chest, gasping for breath as though the truth itself was suffocating her. All these years, every sacrifice, every tear, built on a lie? Eleanor slowly moved toward her, her frail hand resting gently on Jenkins's shoulder. Though her heart seared with anger at Clara's cruelty, compassion won over. The blood doesn't matter, Jenkins. You loved Sophia. You raised her. That makes her yours, more than Clara could ever claim. But the damage was done. Jenkins's face was pale, her world shattered. She whispered through her tears, I betrayed you, Eleanor, for a child who wasn't even mine by blood. I let Clara use me like a pawn. Eleanor squeezed her shoulder firmly, her voice steady. You were manipulated, just like all of us. The blame belongs to Clara, and only Clara. Jason, standing nearby, clenched his fists. His voice cracked with rage and grief. And now the truth is out. Clara destroyed everything, her marriage, her family, Jenkins's life, and for what? Power. Control. The boardroom that once felt like Clara's stage of triumph now stood as a tomb of her secrets, every lie stripped bare. And as Jenkins wept, Eleanor felt the sting of betrayal but also a faint glimmer of something deeper, the possibility of rebuilding, even from ruins. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the soft, ragged sobs of Ms. Jenkins. She sat hunched over, her face buried in her hands, shoulders trembling uncontrollably. The revelation had left her hollow, years of devotion to a child she believed was hers, years of being a loyal confidant, all revealed as a cruel illusion orchestrated by Clara. Jason stood by the window, staring out into the city skyline, his reflection fragmented against the glass. His fists were clenched, his jaw tight, his entire body trembling with a storm of anger and shame. For years, he had doubted his mother, dismissed her concerns, and blindly defended Clara. Now, the truth towered over him like a monument to his failure. Slowly, he turned back. His eyes glistened with tears he could no longer hold back. He walked to Eleanor, his steps unsteady, and dropped to his knees beside her chair. Mother, Jason whispered, his voice cracking. I was blind. I let her poison me against you. I didn't listen. I didn't protect you. And now? I've failed you in every way a son can. Eleanor's wrinkled hand, frail but steady, reached out and touched his face. Her eyes, though tired, shimmered with both sorrow and tenderness. Jason, you were deceived. Clara knew how to twist hearts and words. But you are my son. You have always been my son. And nothing she did will change that. Jason bowed his head, tears spilling freely as he clutched her hands. I don't deserve your forgiveness. And yet, Eleanor murmured, her voice firm but gentle, you already have it. Across the table, Ms. Jenkins lifted her head, her face streaked with tears. She shook her head violently. No, no, not me. Don't forgive me. I was worse than Jason. I knew what I was doing. I signed papers, I handed you documents, her voice broke, I betrayed you, Eleanor. I let her use me. Eleanor turned toward her, her gaze unwavering. She rose slowly from her chair and walked to Ms. Jenkins, placing a hand on her trembling shoulder. You were a victim, Jenkins, Eleanor said softly. Clara fed you lies about your daughter. She tied chains around your heart and used your love as a weapon. That isn't betrayal, that's cruelty inflicted upon you. Ms. Jenkins shook her head, sobbing harder. But I hurt you. I stood by her side when you needed me most. Eleanor knelt slightly, bringing her face level with Jenkins's. Her voice, though fragile, carried a strength that silenced the room. You hurt me because Clara trapped you. But today, you stood against her. You brought the evidence. You gave me the chance to fight back. And that is what I will remember. The words struck like a bomb on an open wound. Jenkins broke down again, but this time the sobs were mixed with relief, a small light piercing through the storm of guilt. Jason reached out, placing his hand gently on Jenkins's arm. We were both fooled. Both of us. But maybe we can help fix what she tried to destroy. For the first time, Jenkins dared to look at him, not with fear or shame, but with the fragile hope that perhaps she wasn't entirely beyond redemption. Eleanor straightened, her posture frail yet resolute, and looked at them both. Clara tried to shatter this family. But I will not let her win. Forgiveness is our weapon, and rebuilding is our answer. The boardroom, once filled with deceit and hostility, now pulsed with a fragile unity. The wounds were still raw, the scars permanent, but in that moment, they began to heal. Months later, the courtroom's gavel had long fallen, but the echoes of Clara's downfall still lingered in everyone's memory. The once confident woman, who had spun webs of deceit with such precision, now lived behind bars, her name a cautionary tale whispered in legal journals and business circles. She had been convicted of fraud, extortion, and identity falsification. For many, justice felt delayed, but for Eleanor, it had finally been served. Ms. Jenkins, though spared prison time, carried her own sentence of guilt and grief. Yet the court acknowledged her as a manipulated victim, and with Eleanor's unwavering testimony on her behalf, she avoided punishment. Instead, she was given the chance to start anew, to heal and to continue raising Sophia, the child she had once been led to believe was her own flesh and blood. Sophia, too young to grasp the storms that had raged around her, clung to Jenkins with innocent trust. She would grow up knowing the truth one day, but for now, she needed only love, stability, and the certainty that she belonged. Eleanor, with her characteristic strength, helped secure Jenkins's custody. A mother, Eleanor had told the judge, is not always the one who gives birth, but the one who stays, protects, and loves. For Eleanor's family, the path to healing was neither short nor easy. Jason lived every day with the weight of regret. Yet he transformed his shame into action, throwing himself into rebuilding the family business not for himself, but as a way of honoring his mother. Together, he and Eleanor restructured the company, this time grounded not in ambition or wealth, but in integrity and trust. Each boardroom meeting became not just about numbers, but about legacy. Leo was Eleanor's constant companion, a source of laughter and vitality. His youthful curiosity and innocence were daily reminders that life always offers renewal. He loved listening to Eleanor's stories, tales of perseverance, wisdom, and love. Often, his small hand would slip into hers during walks in the garden, grounding her in a serenity she had long been denied. As for Ms. Jenkins, she and Sophia slowly found their rhythm in a quieter life. No longer entangled in Clara's lies, Jenkins discovered freedom in the simplest moments, cooking Sophia's favorite meals, reading bedtime stories, and watching her laugh without fear. Though shadows of sorrow remained, peace finally began to seep back into her heart. Eleanor, once burdened by betrayal and manipulation, now walked through her days with a renewed spirit. Her evenings were filled with family dinners, children's laughter, and moments of stillness she had once thought impossible. She often sat by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson, her heart at ease. She had not only survived the storm but had transformed it into something greater, a legacy of resilience, forgiveness, and love. The family she had nearly lost was stronger than ever, bound not by perfection but by the courage to forgive and the will to move forward. And as the seasons changed, so too did Eleanor's story. From betrayal to renewal, from pain to serenity, she had built not just a new chapter, but a new legacy, one that would live on through Jason, Leo, Jenkins, and Sophia. For the first time in many years, Eleanor smiled with the certainty that her life story had come full circle. Not as a tale of loss, but as a testament that even from broken pieces, something beautiful could be rebuilt.